From the UFC GOAT, George St. Pierre, to one of the more recent champions, Islam Makhachev. According to Nate Diaz, more or less everyone's on steroids. But this may not always be true. I mean, guys like Khabib Nurmagomedov were also accused of not being natty in the past. Looking at the former lightweight champ should be enough to put any doubts to rest. He wasn't excessively bulked up. In fact, he was pretty lean. But that didn't stop people from calling him out. Remember how Conor went after Khabib when a couple of his Russian teammates were suspended by the USADA for drug use? Ruslan Magomedov, a former UFC heavyweight, was caught 3 times in a row and was handed a lifetime ban. The USADA has also called out Zubaira Tukhugov in the past, so I can kind of understand where McGregor was coming from. But sometimes these accusations get really weird, like Bobby Green's statement on Islam Makhachev. While talking to the press, he said that the current lightweight champion had been fed performance-enhancing drugs since he was a child. That's why he's so strong right now. Bobby asked people to imagine how strong Islam would have gotten if he had been fed drugs from the age of 10. And it wasn't just Islam he was targeting, because he opened the case on Khabib as well, asking about how it's possible for a 9-year-old kid to wrestle a bear. The king then went on to say that other countries like Russia are a lot more relaxed on their steroid use policies. They want their fighters to win, so they'll give them every advantage they can. Needless to say, this sparked a huge debate over social media, and the fans were completely divided on whether the Dagestanis were natural or not. Of course, none of this was ever proven. So the uproar died down after a couple of days. Firefighter Conor has accused of being a juicehead. But the former champ's greatest rival, Colby, was the one going the hardest after him. He claims that Kamaru's been doing steroids his whole career, and he's also hilariously labeled him as the CEO of EPO. It's probably just a combination of good genes, diet, and exercise. But that obviously won't stop his haters. This reminds me of another fighter of African descent who's been accused of using steroids, Israel Adesanya. Looking at him, no one can say that he's someone who would use PEDs. Sure, he's ripped and athletic, but isn't really bulked up or packs too much muscle. But fans questioned his swollen pectoral muscle after his win over Paulo Costa at UFC 253. Several observers saw that as a sure sign of steroid use. Gynecomastia, or the enlargement of breast tissue in males, is a red flag when it comes to the potential use of anabolic steroids. Izzy was obviously very quick to deny all such accusations. He said that he didn't need the crutch of steroids and that he was undergoing tests to find out the reason behind his swollen pectoral muscle. Most likely, the last stylebender is clean because he was tested by USADA 32 times before his fight with Costa. Something might have come up if he wasn't. And Izzy wasn't the only one to be accused of using PEDs. His opponent was too. That's right, guys. Costa's been there as well. And honestly, I wasn't even surprised about that one. He's a heavily muscular guy, even by UFC standards. I mean, the man looks like a pumped-up cartoon character. But as it stands, the Brazilian was never found positive for any banned substances throughout his career, even though he was tested over 60 times by USADA. He did receive a suspension in 2017, but that was for an illegal IV to help with rehydration after a difficult weight cut. What was surprising, though, was that Izzy also accused the eraser of steroid use and even labeled him as juice to the gills. That wasn't the most bizarre of the allegations either. For some reason, the surfer Kelly Slater apparently jumped in from nowhere and said that if this guy ain't juiced, they shouldn't bother testing at all. Why Slater chose to express his opinion, I can't say, but Costa refuted all these claims. And until he's tested positive, these will be nothing more than accusations. Another fighter who never failed any drug tests was Johnny Hendricks. but he was very often accused of PED abuse. He too was the welterweight champion at one point, and that obviously meant that he had his fair share of haters. Big Rig was already a champion wrestler when he joined the UFC roster in 2009. Since then, he defeated the likes of Carlos Condit, John Fitch, and Martin Kampmann to earn UFC Gold in 2014. But he was seen as a suspicious fighter by several of his fellow athletes, partly because he refused to undergo a more stringent drug test leading up to his title fight against GSP at UFC 167. When USADA began their testing in 2015, Hendricks was one of the most notable stars to suffer a major drop in form. In fact, he lost 5 of last 7 fights before he retired in 2017. He did accept that USADA's testing caused his career to slide though, but that was only because they banned the use of IVs for rehydrating after weight cuts. Matt Brown didn't let go of him even after Hendricks retired. In a 2018 interview, the Immortal said that his rival was one of the most obvious steroid abusers in UFC history. Speaking of rivals, this brings me to the most shocking entry on this list: Georges St-Pierre. Yep, the GOAT too found himself being accused of using PEDs, even though he was perhaps the most supportive of stricter drug testing of all the fighters in UFC's history. He went unbeaten from 2008 to 2013 and defended his welterweight title 9 times. And despite that, Rush never tested positive for any banned substance. He even took part in the more stringent VADA testing program before his last few fights of his run as the champ. GSP footed the bill for that program himself and also asked his opponents to participate in that too. This was something that he took really seriously. That's why he was triggered when Hendricks refused to undergo the same level of testing before their fight, and he chose to step away from the UFC for 4 years. All he wanted was what was best for the sport, but that didn't stop people from calling him a cheater, especially his rivals. Nate Diaz was the loudest one to accuse GSP of being on steroids on more than one occasion. He claimed that the Canadian should have tested positive for banned substances after their fight at UFC 158. Years later, when he returned to establish himself as the double champ, Michael Bisping also accused him of the same thing. After GSP defeated the Count in the middleweight title fight, he claimed that he had heard stories about the MMA GOAT of being a dirty fighter. To me, it looked more like trying to get under his skin than actually accusing him of something illegal. That was all I got about some of the most famous fighters who were accused of steroid use.